I wanted to know how to make language learning more memorable, more enjoyable, and more compelling. I wanted to know how to make language teaching more memorable, more enjoyable, and more compelling. And story logic turned out to be a great answer. In fact, there's a lot of research that backs this up. My name is Joseph Poulshock, aka Dr. Shock. I have a PhD in linguistics from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and over 25 years teaching experience here in Japan, where I teach English and applied linguistics. My recent research deals with the topic of story logic. You can see a link to my two papers here below in the description. One is about story logic, teaching language and communication with story logic, and another was simply entitled Language Teaching with Story Logic. And in this video, I just want to talk about some basic research about this topic, story logic, making language learning stick. So let's get started. All right, so how does story change people? Well, in order for us to learn about the research in story logic and narrative arcs, I think it's really great to look at the research of Dr. Paul Zak. You can see a reference to one of his articles below this video of me speaking. And Dr. Zak, I think, is known as the neuroscientist of story, among other things, right? And in his research on narrative arcs, or story logic, as I call it, Zak measured 12 signals or 12 lines of evidence that show the power of story, right? And in his study, subjects responded to a story stimulus about a father who's dealing with and watching his 2-year-old son die of brain cancer. So in his research, there are 4 key points that come out. 1, story seizes the body, right? So story floods the body with oxytocin, cortisol, and ACTH, right? So oxytocin bonds us to characters and makes us care. Cortisol sharpens attention, and ACTH, that's the adrenal corticotropic hormone. It energizes the body and prepares it to act. So as you're reading a story or engaging with a story that has a strong narrative arc to it, your body releases chemicals that cause you to care about characters, pay attention more, and energize you to act, right? And so story has this power, story logic has this power to command our attention in a way that is hard to resist. You've probably had the same experience as I have had. You got an early day the next day, but you're watching a drama on television and you can't stop. And you end up staying up too late because the story commanded your attention in a way that was hard to resist, right? Secondly, story moves people to act. Story logic moves people to act. Immersed subjects feel empathy, right? When you're immersed in a topic, in a story, a song, or whatever, you feel empathy, right? And so this causes you maybe to open your wallets. If the story is saying, please therefore donate, help this poor father and his son, a lot of people will reach into their wallets and donate, right? And also they carry the story into their lives. It becomes a part of them. They tend not to forget it. Thirdly, story works below our awareness. It burns into memory below our consciousness, right? It affects our behavior without the mind knowing why. And fourthly, story predicts behavior. People watch this story about the father and son, and Zak measured their body responses, their hormones, their heart activity, their skin conductance, etc. And afterwards, people chose whether to donate money or not, right? And the body responses, those who were most immersed in the story were those who were most likely to donate, right? The model guessed correctly about 82% of the time. So when they put all these measurements together, they could say 82% with 82% accuracy who is going to donate or not, right? And so story changes people. And Zak research shows, again in summary, that story seizes the body, it moves people to act, it works below our awareness, and it predicts behavior. So in Zak's study, basically what he's researching is this idea of what he calls immersion. So when someone is responding to a story, engaging with a story, Zak is measuring oxytocin, cortisol, ACTH, that's the adrenal corticotropic hormone, heart rate, vagus nerve activity, skin conductance, respiration, and EEG. And so he measures all these things and builds a immersion score that predicts with 82% accuracy whether people will donate, buy, or act after a narrative experience. Wow, it's pretty powerful research. So for Zak, immersion follows story shape. It rises, it peaks, it releases and moves people to act. So the question for us in linguistics and in applied linguistics and in language teaching and learning, what about story for language learning and teaching. Can we do it? Is there research to back it up for that as well? Well, I did some research with my colleagues at university, and we compared learner responses to two different texts. Text number one, first of all, let me explain both texts, right? So both texts gave the same facts about Chaser, the dog who learned 1,000 words, right? So there's quite a bit of drama in this, that how Chaser not just learned 1,000 words, but the story about his owner and the research that they did and how much trouble they had in trying to publish the research, etc. And so we had two different stories, two different texts about Chaser. One text was a story logical text. Group 1 read a story-powered or story logical text with facts about Chaser set or embedded in the 3 keys of story, which I'll explain just in a second. Right? The second text, Group 2, read a non-story text, a flat text, with the same facts, but the text did not use the 3 keys of story. So for this, what are the 3 keys of story? I'm taking them from Gottschall's 2012 book, The Storytelling Animal, where he says, story is basically a character who wants something, who has an object of desire, as the story logicians say, a character who wants something, who has an object of desire, but who must face conflict, trouble, challenges, danger, and risk in order to reach that object of desire, right? This is where the tension comes in. This is where the narrative arc comes in, where the stress and tension and suspense come in, right? And then as the main character goes through this conflict, there's an attempted extrication. Extrication is this perfect word that means to pull something out of trouble. So the 3 keys of story that we used in text number 1, the story logical text, the story power text, the 3 keys were character who wants something, who faces conflict, and must experience conflict in order to extricate themselves from it, right? The second text, this non-story logical text, did not have those elements in them at all. All right, so what did we learn, right? So we learned this. In the story logical text, the students, the learners, the subjects found the difficulty the same as the non-story text. But for the story logical text, they liked the characters more, and in the non-story text, they liked the characters less than the other subjects, right? For the story logical text, the subjects liked or enjoyed the story more. So they liked the characters more, but they also enjoyed the story more. And in the other non-story text, they enjoyed the text less. Also for the story logical text, they remembered more. And in the non-story text, they remembered less. And lastly, in the story logical text, they also understood the text better. We're actually able to replicate this story. So we did 2 separate studies 1 year apart and got the same kinds of results. All right. So it's interesting, right? Story logic is powerful. Research shows that story logic grabs attention and drives action, right? So why should language teachers and language learners use story logic? Well, to make learning more memorable, more enjoyable, more compelling, right? So if you want to know more about the many, many ways we can use story logic, there are lots of applications to apply this research in practical ways. If you want to know more, just click on the link here. It says readoasis.com/storylogic and get this free guide. It's about 14 pages. You can also sign up for a free webinar, so you can learn how to start using story logic to add more life to your language teaching and language learning.